Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome to this YouTube channel about narcissism and narcissistic relationships. So let me just open with this. You know how many people, stay in narcissistic relationships because you think, damn it, I've already put 15 years or 5 years or 10 years or however much time you've put into this relationship. I've put my youth into this relationship. I've put the best of myself into this relationship. I moved across the country for this relationship. And as a result of that, no matter how toxic it is, you stay. But that doesn't really make sense, does it? You can't get the 5 or the 10 or the 15 years back by staying, but yet you stay for that reason. Here's another example. Different kind of example. You prepaid a non-refundable few $100s for a hotel room for a weekend break. Ahead of that, you are having the week from hell, and then you get sick. The weather shifts, and what should have been a sunny weekend is now going to be rainy and not the best getaway. The pressures at work and home have really started making you sicker, and a weekend in bed at home would do wonders for you, especially since you'll have another tough week the week after. You really don't want to go away and drive 3 hours to sit in the rain. The drive will be exhausting, but you still go. Why? For the same reason folks stay in narcissistic relationships, even when they know they're toxic. It's partly because of something called the sunk cost fallacy, which may be at play here. Once we invest in something, time, money, we often just go along with it, even when it is no longer a good thing to do. Sunk costs are resources we cannot get back. The hotel room, for example, was non-refundable. But this can apply to anything where we can't get what we put in back. So going on that ill-timed trip or doing something that is not a good use of our time will not get that time and money back. However, it is possible that it may result in us getting sicker, not having a good time, wasting more time, or wasting even more money eating out and on various activities on a trip that is actually not good for us, but you're doing so you don't lose the couple $100s. But let me repeat, you cannot get the money back whether you go or not. At the time you made the call to go on the trip, it seemed like a good idea. Now it's not. You not going doesn't get the money back, right? But the fact is, we don't like losing stuff. That's something called loss aversion. It just feels awful. So we may make further bad decisions to avoid that discomfort around losing money or time. So we may do something even when it's not good for us to avoid that sense of loss. So this idea of bad decision making because of things like sunk cost fallacies and loss aversion, they all derive from the world of behavioral economics. Now, alas, we are not computers. We are people who have emotions, and emotions really tinge our decision making. We rationally know that skipping out on the rainy, time-consuming, exhausting weekend is probably the best course of action, but then we also have to sit with the discomfort of wasting the money. There is a cognitive dissonance element here. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. And for many people, getting what they paid for seems like it will smooth things out, even though it ends up becoming a bad way to spend time and you were going to lose the money either way. Economic theory, which is supposed to be more devoid of messy emotion, would have it that we should be using future gains and losses to guide our decisions and not the money that we've already sunk in. If we can do that, we may be less likely to make bad choices, but the fact is, it's not so easy to do. Turns out that negative emotions like anxiety also don't help. And in one study by Dykstra and colleagues, they found that those negative emotions were sort of associated with kind of getting stuck and not taking action and getting stuck in the sunk cost, basically continuing to stay in the bad investment, going on the rainy weekend, staying in the toxic relationship. So what does this have to do with narcissistic relationships? Kind of everything. So you're in a narcissistic relationship, right? Let's use a romantic one as an example. You met someone charming, fun, attractive, charismatic, successful. You have fun. You really are growing to like them and them you, and you want to finally really settle into a committed relationship. They want to move in, so you do. You're hoping to get married. It's been 3 years. They aren't really moving in that direction. You want a family too. You're committed to each other, but no, they're not interested in that. And on top of that, they're really dismissive, manipulative, gaslighty, unkind, critical, and angry. They keep putting you off, saying, oh, we'll get to it, we're good now. It's 3 years. You can't get the 3 years back. So you stay in. And you keep staying in. And they keep moving the goalposts. Yeah, we'll do that down the line. I'm too busy right now. I need more stability. I need to get promoted. Like, why are you rushing me? On and on. Another year goes by. 4 years in. 4 years. I can't walk away. Start again. 4 years. Can't get the 4 years back. 5 years. Still don't have kids. Shit, you want kids. Okay, maybe we won't get married. We'll have kids. That's not how you pictured it. Nah, I don't think they want to have kids. 6 years. The loss aversion in many narcissistic relationships is around time. There are other researchers in the past like Rustbalt who called this the investment model of relationships. But it's a bad investment, just like that weekend away, or a bad business investment, or a project that is running into cost overruns and will never give return on investment. But maybe $50 million has already been sunk into it, and so people just keep throwing more money into it. Emotion takes over. I can't get those 6 years back. I am going to effing make this work. You stay. And maybe with enough time you end up getting married or having those children. Now you're in a relationship, a toxic relationship with someone, and you got kids. Was it a great investment? Were the 6 years wasted or not? It's challenging. Now, most narcissistic relationships of choice, for example, intimate relationships, friendships, workplace relationships, are driven by the sunk cost fallacy, wanting to not walk away from all that time and resource, which is why I am such a big fan of people getting out early when the red flags begin to show up. There's fewer sunk costs at that moment. It all relates to cognitive dissonance, of course, but also that loss aversion. Then you have the confusion of not knowing what this is. Charm and charisma feel so good, so you want this to work. They are attractive, so you want this to work. You want a fun sidekick friend who's just so cool to spend time with. You want this to work. You always wanted to work for this great company, so you want this to work. The idea of walking away after the time and sometimes the money, well, at that point, that's what messes up the decision making. Behavioral economists would say that the future gains and losses, they do need to guide us if we're going to do this decision making right. Now, looking realistically at the long game, not only is that really hard to do when emotion is involved, and that right there is why this YouTube channel exists. Because when it comes to narcissistic relationships, the long game is bad. Putting more and more resources into a narcissistic relationship is like betting on an investment on VCRs making a comeback. Not a good place to park your money. And in a way, there is so much less ambiguity in a narcissistic relationship because they're always going to be unhealthy. Even if the early period was fun, the love bombing period of the relationship was also unhealthy. So you got to make your investment decisions accordingly. So even if you invested heavily in that VCR company, it may have seemed like a good idea at the time in the 1980s. It's not anymore. You can't get the other money back. Spending more money doesn't really make sense. The narcissistic relationship seemed like a good idea during the love bombing phase. Now that you are in devalue and discard, not so much. And you can't get the time back by throwing more time at it. The future will always be more of the same in narcissistic relationships. Another interesting bit of guidance we get from behavioral economics is to break this all down, this decision making, into phases. And I like this because it's a place for you to almost become more self-forgiving in your decision making in this kind of a relationship. The sunk cost fallacy is us not accounting for the idea that we cannot get the money or time back. So putting more money and time into it While it may feel comforting, it doesn't make sense, like I said, even though it's uncomfortable, to let that original investment go. But when we break it into phases, we can assess whether the investment makes sense at each phase. So when we apply this thinking to a narcissistic relationship, it can look like this. Love bombing phase? Seems like a great idea. Putting the time in, putting the investment in, you're loving the ride, you get swept away. It makes sense you would invest time into it then. Even though my hope for the world is that everyone will eventually see love bombing as bad, which I know is a tough sell. So even then, during love bombing, I'd still love to see people sort of hedge their investments. Now you move into the red flags and devaluing phase of the relationship. At this point, you're still investing on the basis of the love bombing phase, right? But some of the blush is off the rose. So this may be when you should start pulling back on the investment a little. But sadly, and this is where it gets interesting, this is exactly when people start doubling the time and investment they make in a narcissistic relationship because a narcissistic person's starting to pull back. In the discard and the future faking and manipulation phase, at this point is really when the sunk cost fallacy really gets us. Because on the basis of what is happening in front of you, this is a good time to say, no thanks. Yes, you did put in the time. You can't get the time back. At this phase, it is no longer a good investment. This right here is the money shot. No pun intended. This is no longer a good play in terms of an investment. As Dykman's research suggests, negative emotions make sunk costs worse. We are often less likely to take action when we feel negative emotions such as anxiety. And unfortunately, that is a key part of the fallout of narcissistic abuse. When we are in the sadness and confusion and anxiety that come from narcissistic abuse, we aren't good at thinking clearly and rationally about how to invest our time, which is precisely when we will keep throwing the good money after bad, as it were. I think one place where behavioral economics research hasn't, I think, sufficiently shown a light is on the fear of regret. Maybe they just put that in with the negative emotions. Fear of regret is an emotion that really muddies the waters for survivors of narcissistic abuse. It still relates to the sunk cost, because not only is there the sense of wasting more time and resource you can't get back, there's also the fear of regret in these narcissistic relationships, that if you don't keep trying, what if you're wrong? What if you walk away from something that actually was good? You're not. You probably aren't wrong. Again, it doesn't mean you have to leave. I'm never going to pressure anyone to leave, but probably it's time to stop bringing your A game to the narcissistic relationship. Pulling back resource means giving the best of yourself to yourself, or to worthy and reciprocal recipients, and not to the narcissist. It means saying, ugh, I will swallow the $200 on the lost hotel room, and then recognizing how good you will feel after a few days of rest. Maybe the resolution of the sunk cost fallacy is radical acceptance. You can't get it back. That's that. And you can still win, though, by not wasting more money, time, or resources. The sunk cost fallacy is a simple sort of a model that cuts to the chase on many of the struggles of people who waste a lot of time in narcissistic relationships. You can't get the time back, but maybe you learn something. And to me, that is a return on investment. Thanks again.